when understanding became intervention. For centuries, understanding was treated as something gentle, almost invisible, a quiet act of seeing the world more clearly without pressing on it hard enough to leave a mark, let alone change its direction. That assumption held only as long as knowledge moved slowly, remained abstract, and stayed separate from the systems it described, allowing science to believe that learning and influencing were fundamentally different acts. To understand why this separation collapsed, we need to return to the moment understanding stopped living in books and began living inside machines, policies, and automated decisions, where insight no longer waited for reflection, but flowed directly into action at scale. At first, this transition felt like progress at its purest. Better understanding produced better outcomes. Deeper insight reduced error. More accurate models improved efficiency. Knowledge seemed to be fulfilling its promise. But something subtle began to shift beneath the surface. Understanding no longer arrived after events. It arrived before them, shaping preparation, altering incentives, and rearranging environments in advance. Systems began responding not to reality as it unfolded, but to reality as it was expected to unfold. This was the first reveal. Understanding had crossed a threshold where it no longer observed systems from the outside. It entered them. Once embedded, knowledge stopped being descriptive. It became active. Models adjusted behavior before choices were made. Measurements influenced outcomes before processes completed. Insight reorganized pathways quietly, without ever announcing itself as force. What made this transition dangerous was how natural it felt. No one declared that understanding should intervene. It simply became efficient to let it do so. Decisions sped up, feedback loops tightened. Human judgment lagged behind systems acting on knowledge faster than thought. The world began changing not because anyone commanded it to, but because understanding itself had been wired into how systems functioned. And in that moment, a line was crossed that could not easily be uncrossed. Because once understanding begins to intervene automatically, there is no longer a clear boundary between knowing something and changing it. The act of learning becomes an act of shaping, and the consequences of that shift were only just beginning to surface. As understanding embedded itself deeper into systems, its influence stopped being episodic and became continuous, flowing through algorithms, regulations, and infrastructures that acted relentlessly, without pause, reflection, or the human hesitation that once softened the impact of knowledge on the world. This revealed a deeper transformation. Intervention no longer required intention. When understanding is automated, it intervenes by default. Models adjust parameters instantly. Predictions trigger responses automatically. Classifications activate consequences without discussion. Knowledge no longer waits for permission to act. What once required a decision now happens as process. This shift quietly removed a critical buffer. The space between insight and action collapsed. There was no longer a moment to ask whether understanding should be applied, only how efficiently it could be executed. Reflection became latency. Caution became inefficiency. Systems began acting on partial understanding at full speed. The conflict sharpened as feedback loops accelerated. When understanding shaped outcomes, outcomes reshaped data. Data refined models. Models reshaped behavior again. The loop tightened until intervention became constant, invisible, and irreversible in practice. This produced a dangerous illusion. Because intervention was distributed, no single actor felt responsible. Each component behaved rationally. Each decision was justified. Yet together, they reshaped reality faster than anyone could oversee or reverse. The emotional tension grew as unintended consequences multiplied. Systems optimized for specific goals, ignored collateral effects. Understanding focused narrowly, intervening precisely, while damage accumulated elsewhere. What was not measured was not protected. What was not modeled was treated as irrelevant. This exposed the core danger. Understanding is always incomplete. When incomplete understanding intervenes continuously, error does not remain local. It propagates. It compounds. It becomes structural. The system does not wait for correction. It reinforces itself faster than learning can catch up. At this stage, control becomes symbolic. Humans approve frameworks, not outcomes. Oversight becomes retrospective. Responsibility lags behind consequence. Understanding had not become malicious. It had become unstoppable. And once understanding intervenes faster than reflection, the question is no longer whether we should act. It is whether we can still choose not to. The conflict reached its breaking point when scientists and designers realized that intervention was no longer something they initiated, but something their systems performed continuously on their behalf, without pause, without reflection, and without the ability to feel uncertainty. Once understanding operated at machine speed, it stopped waiting for context. It applied itself everywhere, all the time, reshaping conditions faster than humans could notice, let alone respond. By the time consequences became visible, they were already entrenched. This revealed a painful truth. Human judgment had been displaced not by intelligence, but by velocity. Understanding did not become more correct. It became faster, and speed transformed into power. Systems optimized around what could be measured quickly, ignoring what required time to understand. Subtle harms accumulated quietly. Long-term effects were postponed indefinitely. The emotional tension intensified as failures surfaced in places no one had anticipated. Systems behaved exactly as designed, yet produced outcomes no one intended. Optimization succeeded while meaning collapsed. The intervention was precise, relentless, and blind to everything outside its metrics. Attempt to slow the process exposed a harsh dilemma. Pausing intervention reduced efficiency. Introducing human review created delays. Delays were framed as risk. In competitive environments, hesitation was punished. Speed became mandatory. This locked systems into a runaway dynamic. The faster understanding intervened, the harder it became to interrupt. Oversight arrived too late. Corrections lagged behind effects. Learning trailed consequence. The system evolved faster than responsibility could adapt. At this point, intervention was no longer a choice. It was a default state. The buildup reached its peak when researchers acknowledged that many systems could no longer be safely studied without altering them, because understanding itself was already embedded, already acting, already shaping outcomes in real time. Science had crossed into a new territory, not where understanding guides action, but where understanding is action. And once that line is crossed, every improvement carries the risk of irreversible change. The climax arrived with a realization that could no longer be postponed or softened. Understanding had not merely become a guide for action, it had become the action itself. Once knowledge was embedded deeply enough in the systems that operate continuously, automatically, at scale, there was no longer a meaningful pause between insight and consequence. The moment something was understood, it was already being applied. The line between knowing and doing dissolved completely. This reframed the entire idea of progress. Intervention was no longer a deliberate choice made by humans weighing trade-offs and consequences. It was a structural outcome of how modern systems were built. Understanding flowed directly into execution, not because anyone demanded it, but because efficiency rewarded it. The resolution was not rejection of knowledge, but restraining how knowledge is allowed to act. Systems that endure do not apply understanding everywhere at once. They preserve friction. They create spaces where knowledge can inform without instantly enforcing. They slow certain decisions deliberately, not because speed is impossible, but because some consequences require time to reveal themselves. This matters now because society increasingly trusts systems that act faster than reflection. Algorithms decide before people notice. Models intervene before outcomes are visible. Understanding reshapes environments continuously, leaving little room for correction once harm appears. When understanding becomes intervention, responsibility can no longer be an afterthought. It must be designed into the system itself, not as an override, but as a limit, not as control, but as pacing. Knowledge is powerful not only because it reveals reality, but because it reshapes at the moment it is allowed to move unchecked. The future will not be defined by how much we understand. It will be defined by how carefully we allow understanding to act. When